Going over to Indianapolis, let's talk about their backfield a little bit. So we have Zack Moss, who's dealing with, I mean, it was a forearm, but I thought he was dealing with a shoulder injury too. And then also we have JT, who hurt his thumb, had that surgery. It looks like he's coming off IR. So give us a little bit of this, Tom. What's going on with the Colts, their backfield? What are some things that we can expect, from an injury standpoint?
I'll start with Jonathan Taylor. He had a thumb UCL injury that required surgery with an internal brace about 3 weeks ago. Now, he did practice in full today, and this is interesting and an interesting one to monitor because if you look at the rehab protocols for this type of surgery, it's usually not until weeks 5, 6, or even 8, depending on the surgeon, where they're clearing the person for gripping and strengthening. So, holding a football, catching a football, that takes gripping, that takes strength. So even if he's playing this week, I am suspecting that they're still going to be very cautious with that thumb, heavily wrap it, heavily brace it, probably to the point where he can't move his thumb to prevent him from trying to grip. So what that means is he's not going to be able to catch the ball. He's not going to be able to block very well either. So I expect him to be purely in on first and second down to run the ball, and that should not be inhibited at all. He should be able to run just fine. Could easily handle 20 to 25 carries, 100+ yards, and a touchdown. I just don't think that passing work's going to be there. And we talked about this last week, or maybe not last week, a few weeks ago, how that role would be taken by Zack Moss when Taylor returns. Well, guess what? Now Zack Moss is dealing with a wrist injury. We saw his arm get slammed into the ground. He pretty much punched the ground when he scored that touchdown. That's going to put a lot of force through that wrist, through that forearm. And that's actually the forearm that he broke in training camp this year. He had a surgery to repair it. And luckily, he didn't refracture anything, but definitely dealing with some kind of injury in the wrist, forearm, they're telling us. And you're right, there was reports from Schefter yesterday that it was a shoulder injury. Now, outside of yesterday, I have not seen shoulder reported at all. I don't know if that was a misrepresentation or if that's actually also what he's also dealing with, because that type of impact, the impact from the ground goes up through the arm into the shoulder. So he could totally be dealing with a sprain or something in the shoulder as well. Whatever it is, either of those, both of those are upper body injuries, so they're not going to affect his running. But again, if Taylor's back, Moss is not going to be getting a heavy workload. I was expecting him to be the one catching the passes and in on third down, blocking and whatnot. He's not going to be able to do that very well. So now we're probably looking at Taylor getting the bulk of the carries on first and second down, and one of the other guys who filled in the other night doing most of the third down work.
And Tom, one of those other guys was no other than Trey Sermon, who went for 17 carries and 88 yards. Remember when he was such a relevant name? I mean, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago? Sleeper, rookie, maybe even longer than that. He was really talked about early in the year, didn't amount to too much, but had a decent game. And listen, the Colts are 8-6, and they could be 9-6 after this week. They're playing the reeling and quite possibly the very uninspired Falcons that are just refusing to fire Arthur Smith until the season's over. So they're in a win. All these teams so far we've talked about are in like a must-win, win now scenario. Fantasy football wise, it's sketchy. It's hard for me to tell you to sit Jonathan Taylor, right? Like it's just a weird situation coming off that injury. But like Tom, I think my biggest fear would be that all three of them are active. Like you get JT on some early work, which would you play him? I mean, you're not really concerned too much with his workload in terms of just straight handoffs, right?
I would totally play him, but understand that it's going to be groundwork, and that's probably it. But it's probably going to be a lot of groundwork.
Right. Against the possibly again the Falcons could be an ugly game. Unfortunately, those riding Zack Moss, it's been a roller coaster for you guys. It's been up and down. He's really been awesome at some points, but I don't know that is going to last into the fantasy playoffs here. All right.